In 1970, Douglas Aircraft released a jet that was supposed to change aviation. It was faster than any plane in the sky, more powerful, capable of carrying more passengers across greater distances than its competitors. And for one brief, shining moment, Douglas had what the entire aviation industry wanted: a direct answer to Boeing's supremacy. But here's what nobody tells you. Within just 4 years, the DC-10 would be linked to the deadliest aviation accident in human history. And not just once. Again and again, the aircraft would find itself at the center of catastrophe. By the time the dust settled, an entire empire had crumbled. And the question everyone was asking wasn't if the DC-10 can beat Boeing. It was something far darker about if this plane is even safe to fly. Stay with me, because what led to this plane's rise and fall is one of the most dramatic stories in aviation history. Let's rewind to the late 1960s. Boeing was untouchable. The 747 had just revolutionized long-haul flight, and the aviation world was genuflecting at the altar of commercial jet dominance. But Douglas Aircraft, the legendary manufacturer that had been quietly building aircraft since World War I, saw an opportunity that Boeing had overlooked. There was a specific gap in the market. Airlines needed something that could do what the 747 couldn't: operate on shorter, regional routes with the same capacity and efficiency. Enter Donald Douglas and his team of engineers who decided to reshape the industry by building a tri-engine wide-body jet. Hence, the DC-10 was born. Now, picture this. It's 1970. A magnificent silver machine rolls out of the factory in Long Beach, California. At 182 feet long, it's sleek, purposeful, nearly as big as the 747, but with something revolutionary: 3 engines. 2 mounted on the wings, 1 mounted on the tail, just above the fuselage. The symmetry was almost architectural. The power was undeniable. The DC-10 wasn't just another airliner. It was Douglas throwing down a gauntlet directly at Boeing's feet. And for a moment, it worked. Airlines were placing orders. Japan Airlines, Alitalia, Pakistan International, the world's best carriers wanted this plane. By the early 1970s, Douglas was flying high. The future looked golden. But what happened next shocked the entire world. Here's where the story gets interesting. The DC-10's third engine, that innovation that made it special, was also its greatest vulnerability. It was mounted on the tail, which meant pilots couldn't see it from the cockpit. It had its own isolated hydraulic systems, its own design considerations. It made the plane unique. It also made it fragile in ways nobody fully appreciated until it was too late. McDonnell Douglas, who had merged with Douglas by this point, faced constant pressure to innovate faster, deliver better, and undercut Boeing's prices. Engineering teams were working at breakneck speed. Safety features were being calculated, recalculated, and compressed into tighter parameters. Cost-cutting became the unofficial motto in certain corners of the design process. The DC-10 entered service in the summer of 1971. Everything seemed fine. For a while, it was as airlines loved it. Passengers boarded with the same confidence they had in any modern jetliner. The economics worked. The performance exceeded expectations. Douglas was competitive again. Then came March 1974. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. This is where the DC-10 story takes its darkest turn. A Turkish Airlines DC-10 departed Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport on its way to London. There were 346 people on board, passengers from around the world, families reuniting, businessmen heading to meetings, flight attendants eager to complete their shift. Nobody knew this would be the last flight they ever took. But something was catastrophically wrong with the aircraft, and nobody in the cockpit knew it yet. The DC-10's cargo door had a design flaw. It was a subtle thing, really. The kind of engineering detail that might slip past inspectors, might go unnoticed for months or even years. But in the high-pressure environment of commercial aviation, even small oversights have cosmic consequences. As Flight 981 climbed to cruising altitude, internal pressurization built up inside the fuselage, exactly as it was designed to do. The cabin pressure was immense, tons of force pushing outward on every panel, every sealed compartment. And then, in a moment that would echo through aviation history, the cargo door quietly came open. The rush of air that exploded out of that opening was catastrophic. It wasn't just wind. It was a decompression event, so violent that it ripped through structural supports, severed hydraulic lines, and collapsed multiple deck sections in the main cabin. The aircraft became unflyable in seconds. What the pilots felt in the cockpit was sudden, inexplicable chaos. The plane was no longer responding to their commands in any meaningful way. Captain Zeller and his crew fought with every ounce of expertise they possessed. But there was no recovery. The DC-10 descended rapidly, losing control, spiraling down toward the forest outside Paris. On March 3, 1974, it crashed near Ermenonville, leaving no survivors. It became the deadliest aviation accident in the history of flight. A record that seemed unthinkable. A tragedy that became a turning point. And here's what happened next that nobody expected. The investigation that followed wasn't just about finding out what went wrong. It was about uncovering layers of systemic problems, design oversights, and cost-cutting decisions that had been quietly accumulating in the DC-10's architecture. The cargo door had indeed been identified as a potential problem, but not in any significant, actionable way. There had been warnings, there had been reports, but they weren't treated with the gravity they deserved. Here's the brutal truth. The DC-10's cargo door design was simpler and cheaper to manufacture than alternatives that engineers had considered. Speed and cost had influenced the decision-making process in subtle but profound ways. When you're a manufacturer trying to compete with Boeing, when your survival as a company depends on delivering aircrafts faster and cheaper than your rival, sometimes those pressures find their way into engineering decisions. It's not malice. It's not negligence in the typical sense. It's something more insidious. It's the accumulated pressure of corporate ambition. The aviation community was shaken. The FAA launched immediate investigations. They discovered that other DC-10s had experienced cargo door problems before. Japan Airlines had reported issues. Other carriers had noted anomalies. Some of these issues had been known, documented, and in certain cases addressed through service bulletins rather than mandatory structural redesigns. Within months, there was another incident. Turkish Airlines Flight 981's crash wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was an indictment. The industry, regulators, and manufacturers all had questions to answer, and the public was watching. Trust, once broken, is extraordinarily difficult to restore. What happened after the Ermenonville crash wasn't just about fixing the cargo door. It was about something far more fundamental. The DC-10 had been positioned as the aircraft that would challenge Boeing. That would shake up the market. That would prove Douglas could compete with the industry giant. Instead, it became the symbol of everything that can go wrong when engineering excellence takes a backseat to market pressures. Douglas, already struggling financially, never fully recovered from the reputational damage. The DC-10 continued to fly, continued to operate, and over the following decades, it proved itself to be a capable aircraft when maintained and operated properly. But that first narrative, that victorious arc where Douglas reclaimed its place among aviation's elite, that was over. The company eventually abandoned the DC-10 line and pivoted to the MD-11, a modernized version that aimed to recapture the spirit of the original vision. But the moment had passed. Boeing had weathered the storm. The 777 was on the horizon. The fundamental hierarchy of commercial aviation had been established, and it favored the manufacturer with deeper pockets, more structural resources, and perhaps most importantly, the first mover advantage in public trust. By the 1990s, Douglas had ceased to exist as an independent manufacturer. It was absorbed into McDonnell Douglas, which was eventually acquired by Boeing itself. In a stunning twist of history, the very company that had tried to overtake Boeing ended up becoming part of it. Just another division, another legacy subsumed into the machinery of a larger whole. But the DC-10 itself, it kept flying, carried millions of passengers, set records, operated for over 4 decades with thousands of aircrafts built. Yes, there were other incidents. Yes, there were more lessons to learn. But after the infrastructure upgrades and mandatory redesigns, it proved itself capable, resilient, and ultimately reliable. The DC-10 didn't lose to Boeing because it was a fundamentally inferior aircraft. It lost because one moment of vulnerability, one design flaw left unaddressed, one catastrophe that killed 346 people, fractured the narrative forever. It's a reminder that in aviation, in engineering, in any high-stakes industry, there's a difference between being competitive and being wise. The fastest doesn't always win. The cheapest doesn't always win. And sometimes the company that survives isn't the one with the best aircraft. It's the one that learns to prioritize what matters most before tragedy forces their hand. If you're fascinated by how one aircraft shaped modern aviation history, stick around for the next video and don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's another story you won't want to miss.